friend on the very sensitive way she opened this debate and commend the powerful speeches we've heard on this. I oppose the view expressed in the petition. I want to explain why. And essentially it's for this reason, that if we were to legalise assisted dying, I think we would impose an awful moral dilemma on every conscientious, frail elderly person nearing the end of their life. We've probably all known a number of such people. They've got a lot of anxieties at that stage of their life, and they worry very much about being a burden to their children, needing care from them, and also consuming resources which their children would otherwise inherit. If ending their life early was legally permissible, many who don't want to end their lives would feel under very great, probably irresistible pressure to do so, and there just is no way out of that happening. Surely, yes, I'll gladly give way.
I'm very grateful, and knowing my right honourable friend as I do, I know he's sincere in his views. Having said that, will he accept that the group of family members and people who are at the end of their lives, who feel they might be under pressure to conserve the inheritance of the children or not to be a burden on the children, there is another group, rarely talked about, who put pressure on the parents to stay alive, or their loved ones to stay alive, and they do so out of love. And, you know, would he accept that both sides, more often than not, do so out of love rather than for venal reasons, and doesn't really one argument cancel out the other?
Well, I accept wholly the point that he's making, and I think a lot of the people that I'm concerned about and I'm expressing a worry about are people who are deeply loved by their children but don't want to be an undue burden on those children. I'm not saying that those children want to hasten their death or anything like that. I don't think that's very often the case. Occasionally it might be. But I do think that conscientious, frail elderly people in that situation will feel they ought to avoid being a burden and will feel the pressure to end their lives prematurely as a result. And what I would say to the House is we ought not to impose such a burden on vulnerable people nearing the end of their lives. And I think the penalty of the downside of doing so would be significantly greater than the considerable benefits we've heard set out in this debate. I'm going to make a bit more progress. I am mindful in setting out this view of the stern instruction we all, I think, received last week from the National Secular Society, and I quote, "Dire warnings," they wrote, "about the coercion of disabled, elderly, sick, or the depressed can mask true motivations for opposing a change in the law, disguising religious objections as secular concerns rather than seeking ways to mitigate potential risks of legalising assisted dying. Opponents can exaggerate the risks, weaponising them to spread fear." Now, the National Secular Society will probably regard me as one of the guilty parties here, but I don't think the concerns I am expressing are only apparent to religious people. Disabled people's organisations have been very clear in the interests of all the people that they represent, and certainly not on any religious grounds, that legalising assisted dying would be a deeply damaging change. And I think they're right. I will give way, yeah.
I've heard that argument made a couple of times, and I respect the associations involved. But how would he reflect on the fact that, according to polls, 86% of people who live with a disability are in favour of a change, which is greater than the population as a whole? So I don't understand the point he's making.
I haven't seen the polls that he's referring to, but I think it is the case that all the major organisations representing disabled people in the UK oppose this change in the interests of their members. Now, there are good and compassionate arguments, and we've heard a number of them, in favour of the change the petition is calling for. I don't agree with those arguments, but let's be clear, they are not the only arguments for this change. In some minds, they're clearly not the decisive arguments either. For some, and in some countries, as we've been told, where the change has been made, this is explicit, it is about saving the health service money. Now, my party introduced the National Health Service. It's our proudest achievement. It needs to be adequately funded. The fact that it isn't being adequately funded at the moment mustn't become an excuse for giving up and accepting that painful deaths are unavoidable. Instead, we need to invest, as everybody I think has agreed so far in this debate, invest in palliative care where there have been big advances and where there could be many more, and ensure that adequate care is provided to everybody who needs it. I agree with the organisation Care Not Killing that we want, I quote, a funded policy for comprehensive hospice, community and hospital specialist palliative care services across the country, with a duty placed on NHS trusts to ensure these services are made available to all who need them. I visited my local children's hospice on Saturday. We've heard a number of members who've made such visits, and they had a fate to raise funds. They're struggling for cash. They shouldn't have, in my view, to do that. In place of fear was how Nye Bevan summed up what had been achieved in founding the NHS. Let's not give up now and decide we can no longer afford the relief from fear which he rightly, in my view, promised. I can't give way anymore, I don't think. We should renew our determination not to impose fear, not to impose an awful moral dilemma on frail and conscientious elderly people approaching the end of their lives, and instead insist on modern palliative care for those who need it and a properly funded health service which supports living.